Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I have been kind of MIA because I've just been so busy moving. So apologies for that. Hopefully things are going to start going back to normal in the next few weeks once we're all moved and settled in. But it's really hectic moving 6 horses and an entire house and all of the horses stuff. Mostly the horses are the hard part. But all that aside, let's just jump into the video because I know that the title I'm going to make this video is going to set a lot of people off. So just hear me out before you make a comment. Just hear me out with what I'm going to say. So I wanted to talk about some of the recent stuff with the Olympics and kind of just continue on with what I was talking about in my last video before this one, as well as the whole Charlotte Dujardin case. For those of you who aren't aware of that, she was caught on video a few years ago whipping a horse over 24 times and has now been suspended by the FEI. And it's just a really big source of controversy in the horse world because of the nature of the issue and how beloved she was in the community. And just how she was known for being softer with horses. So it caused a lot of controversy. And I wanted to talk about that. And I know that the title of this video being I feel sorry for Charlotte Dujardin is going to piss people off who watch the video and just go, that's unacceptable. I'm not condoning her actions in saying that. What I wanted to talk about is how she's being used as a scapegoat by the horse industry and how she's been thrown under the bus by so many of her peers who are guilty of doing similar things or in some cases worse. Like, for example, Isabel Worth was interviewed about it and was saying how we all need to step up to advocate for horse welfare and speak out against things that are wrong, and says all these things and then goes to the Olympics and rides her horse with such a tight rein that she causes a blue tongue from hypoxia, which is the tongue not getting enough oxygenated blood. So it's from pressure cutting off the circulation of the tongue in layman's terms. And she spoke out against Charlotte and was basically condemning her actions, which I think is more of an effort to evade accountability for her own wrongs. Similarly, Carl Hester threw Charlotte under the bus and said that he wasn't aware of what was going on and that he condemns the actions and that we all need to do better for the horses, blah, 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 blah. And I get that in his case it's damage control, but like something that I think we need to talk about is that Charlotte was like his prodigy and they worked really closely together and were in the same barn. I personally find it really hard to believe that he had absolutely no awareness of how she trained and that even smaller versions of what was captured on that video were not present in any capacity in anywhere he could see, because whipping horses, maybe not 24 times, but it's not something that's uncommon. You see it at shows, you see it in the warm-up ring, you see it in the show ring. It's something that happens in competitive horse sports and that a lot of trainers are either okay with doing themselves, or even if they're not okay with it, they're not going to speak out or say anything because so many of their peers do the same thing. So for him to throw his prodigy under the bus who learned from him, I think was pretty sad. So the reason why I feel bad for Charlotte is not her being held accountable for her actions, but it's because she's being used as a scapegoat. She's being singled out and it's being blown to such a proportion surrounding her to put the focus on her and take it off of other people who are guilty of doing the same things but have just not been caught yet. Because another example in Isabel Worth's case is that she condemned Charlotte's actions, but then in another interview when she was asked about Helgstrand, she defended him and said that she's gotten a lot of nice horses from him. And for those of you who don't know about Helgstrand, his operation was spied on essentially by a journalist who wore a hidden camera and a microphone, and she caught a whole bunch of things such as horses being whipped, roll cur, really tight draw reins, etc. And there's a whole lot of welfare issues that were caught in that video. So while he denies any knowledge of that and he says he wasn't present in the video, which was true, he is a known proponent of roll cur and has been caught on film and on photos roll curring horses in warm-up arenas at shows. So it's not really far off to assume that since it is his barn and the people who are working there are influenced by him in some capacity, that he was aware of what's going on, but she openly defended him. So to do that and then to condemn Charlotte and then also do the types of things that she's been caught on video doing in clinics, like roll curring horses in clinics and just her own scandals, it's just in really poor taste. So what I wanted to kind of speak about briefly is more so the fact that I hate seeing people use instances where riders are captured doing bad things to horses as a means of trying to elevate themselves to the level of being a welfare advocate, when in every other case, they are not doing that. And Isabel Worth is not doing that. Carl Hester is not actively speaking out against problems in dressage and how hyperflexion is being rewarded, and he won't, because his test at the Olympics was a very overbent test. They're not even criticizing themselves and going, oh my gosh, I had a really hyperflex test and the scoring was such that I don't think I deserve those scores. But in the moment when these things are going on and when there's other scandals that are not so directly related to them or don't get blown up so much in the media, they're not saying or doing anything or advocating for any meaningful change. They just jump on these scandals as a means of trying to take themselves out of the equation and not be held accountable. And that's something that I can't stand. And it also just makes Charlotte a scapegoat where she's being the center of a ton of scrutiny and hatred, when she is far from the only one, and that upset should be distributed over lots of upper level riders who are guilty of the same things and worse. So my issue with it is the scapegoating of it and the vilification of it, to the point where it's like, okay, this person was caught on video doing a really bad thing. They're a terrible, irredeemable person who's just evil and really mean-tempered and doing things out of malice, which misses the point. These people learn how to train this way from somewhere. These people learn that it's acceptable to handle horses like that from somewhere. Speaking from experience, as someone who was taught to do crappy things to horses as a child, it is a learned behavior, and you get comfortable doing these types of things even in front of new students, and even when you have people watching and videoing what is going on, like in the case with the Charlotte whipping video. You get comfortable doing these things over time because it's normalized to you by so many other people. And it starts to create this like echo chamber like environment where you're no longer questioning things that years prior you would have viewed as unacceptable. And that is why these issues are so rampant. So focusing on one rider or even a handful of riders is missing the mark. There are incentives in place to encourage people to train in this way. There was also just another scandal recently with a rider from Denmark whipping her horse while she was training Piaf, and she whips the horse several times, not as much as Charlotte did, but it is a shorter video. And she has been removed from the Denmark team, and this was leading up to the Olympics, so she did not compete at the Olympics. I forget her name, but I'll add it in the text on this video. And so that happened, and that's just yet another instance where this is like being shown to be something that is happening repeatedly at the upper levels. And I had a few people comment on that video of the rider from Denmark when I shared it, to say that the person speaking German in the background was Andreas Helgstrand, and he was saying to strike the horse harder with the whip. That is just going to be alleged because I don't speak German. And I don't know his voice well enough to say whether or not it was him, but lots of people train with him and lots of people support what he is doing. So if that is actually true, then it lends credence to the fact that he was not only aware of what was going on in his barn, which was captured by the journalist undercover, but he was a participant in it and teaching people to do the same, even if he himself was not captured on video. Because as far as I'm concerned, if you're standing there as a trainer telling the rider that you are teaching to do something, you are just as guilty as the rider, if not more guilty in some cases, especially if the rider is underage, which in this case, the rider wasn't. But what I'm saying is that kids are impressionable, and the more someone is viewed as like an amateur or less knowledgeable, even if they are a professional, the more likely they are to fold to the direction of someone who's perceived as an authority figure who is more knowledgeable than them. But what we as a community really need to look at is like what factors have led to our horse industry being this way. Like what has made people feel like that this is not only the like okay to do, but is the best and most successful path of getting to where their goals are. What factors are at play that are making this behavior normalized enough that these scandals keep arising? And they're going to continue to, because this is the thing. There's a lot of riders at the upper levels who are guilty of the same things and worse that have just not been caught yet. And in some cases, they have been caught in the sense that people have witnessed them doing it, but it's a situation where it's the witness's word against this big figure in the horse community. And as someone who has witnessed stuff where trainers in my local community, not necessarily anyone as big as like an Olympian, doing bad things to horses, where these trainers have really upstanding reputations, unless I had a foolproof way of like showing that this definitively happened, I wouldn't openly say anything with a name attached or anything like that, because it is not worth the fallout. It is not worth being called a liar and having your entire reputation smeared. And that is to a far lesser extent, because if you're going after an Olympian and someone who is an internationally acclaimed rider and you cannot definitively prove it, like even if you have a video, if the video is poor quality, you cannot clearly see who it is, and you can't prove that for sure it is the person that you are trying to incriminate, then odds are you are going to end up getting far more heavily punished than the rider who's documented doing the abusive thing. So in a lot of cases, it is far too risky for people to speak out, because we're looking at people who have a ton of money, power, and influence. And they have the ability to silence people because of that. So there's a lot of people who it's an open secret that they are training in a certain way, or that they have done certain things to horses, and that they're not the most ethical person. But it's not going to become a known fact without that hard evidence and someone brave enough to bring it forward. Because that's the other thing, is even if you have the hard evidence, bringing it forward, even with the evidence, you're going to end up getting hit with a lot of people who are going to work harder to discredit you so that they can justify continuing to support a rider that you've now called to question. And they're not going to want to believe something that's hard for them to hear. And I say this also as someone who has had people reach out to me about people in the community with proof that have asked me, like, how do you think this is going to go if I come forward? And honestly, even as a welfare advocate and like the belief that we should bring this stuff to light and make changes, speaking as a person, there's a lot of factors at play where for some people it's not worth it to their livelihood and their well-being to bring it forward, because if they're in any type of fragile mental state or in any position where they can get struck out of the horse industry to the point of not being able to make a living or take care of themselves, or be put in such a poor mental state that they are at risk, then you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of how successful coming forward and speaking out is going to be. So I understand why people stay silent, because it took me a while to have the amount of courage to speak out to the extent that I do. And even in doing so, like the more I do it and the more contentious and controversial and just like upset these issues start to become, the more hyper aware I am of the fact that if someone wants to, that if they have enough money and power, they could try to do something to me to silence me. And it's a scary thing to come to terms with. So it's a really complex issue that has a lot of different moving parts and a ton of people involved. And when we fixate on one specific rider as if they are the entire problem in the industry, we are missing the mark on what the actual problem is. So my hope is that people remain open-minded enough to consider the fact that how someone chooses to move on past these scandals will ultimately define who they are as a rider. Charlotte could use this as a really good learning experience and use it as a push to get her to speak out about more problems in the industry and how toxic things can be at the upper levels, and ultimately what led her to making those decisions. She could use it as a learning experience to show the culture involved that leads people to doing those things. But that needs to be seen first. And the other side of it is that there's a lot of other people who are guilty of the same things and worse. So fixating on one singular person and scapegoating them is not how we're going to get ahead of this in the industry and really start to make meaningful change. Personally, for me, what I would like to see make the most change would be organizations like the FEI that are setting forth certain regulations and are ultimately mandating these competitive horse sports actually make the move to do something positive and start to really crack down on horse welfare and set standards in place to really discourage this type of behavior from happening. If we started to have horse welfare factored into subjective judging marks, and horses who were highly stressed got marks down more, and judges were trained to recognize these things and trained by welfare and behavioral professionals, it would be a lot less incentivizing for people to take shortcuts that at their core are about stressing and forcing the horse into compliance.
because if you have a horse who's highly stressed in competition and you're going to lose marks for that, trying to speed up your training process by stressing out the horse and then having them exhibit those behaviors in competition is not going to be so lucrative and rewarding. So there's things that need to be done. And what I just want to reiterate and kind of end this video with is that these issues are far from just one person or a handful of people. It's a systemic issue that is enabled and encouraged by organizations like the FEI, and that is more or less an open secret amongst people at the upper levels. And that's why people are trying so hard to defend it, and that's why people will go to all sorts of lengths to try to justify the behavior of their favorites at the upper levels, because they don't want to come to terms with how big of a problem this is. So while I don't condone Charlotte's actions in the video, I do feel sorry for her, because dealing with the public outcry along with all of these people that you thought were your friends coming and throwing you under the bus to save their own asses when you know damn well that they are probably guilty of the same things as you, that sucks. And it just shows how quickly these people are willing to turn on each other to save their own skins when stuff like this happens. And that's another thing to look at, is that I really don't believe that people in this big upper level riders club that are this closely aligned, and with the amount of gossip that happens in the horse world, I don't believe that there's a lack of awareness about these things occurring. Like, people talk, it's just about whether or not people come forward with enough evidence to actually have it catch fire in the way that this whole Charlotte scandal has. So I'm glad that she is being held accountable right now, and I hope that her behavior changes. And I really do truly hope that the people who have called her out and thrown her under the bus are actually going to change their own behavior in accordance with that. But it's pretty appalling to watch, because it's just like, wow, like the lengths people will go to try to paint themselves as being something different than what they are. And it's disturbing. Like it's really like getting kicked out of like the exclusive riders club, and Charlotte's been evicted from it because she's had such a damning scandal arise that people want to distance themselves from her, which I'm sure their publicists encourage them to do. So it's not to just blame it on them as if it's a decision that they made without any other outside influences, but it's still a shitty thing to do. And I think it just speaks for how selfish the motivations are at that level to a large extent. Because also in Isabel Worth's case, the fact that she defended Helgstrand, I think, is more because of the amount of power that man holds. Like, he's a multi-billionaire who owns a whole lot of organizations in the horse world. Like, he owns a bunch of different show parks, including Wellington Equestrian Center. He owns a bunch of equestrian brands. He owns Chronicle of the Horse, which is one of the major media companies in the horse industry. He has a lot of power and influence, and speaking out against him in an interview could land you in trouble. And I think that has something to do with it too. Whereas Charlotte, even though she was such a renowned and respected rider, is a little bit of an easier target because she's not coming from so much power and influence in comparison to Helgstrand, which is why I think people are more comfortable throwing her under the bus as well. But the fact of the matter is, we have this big group of upper level equestrians who could be speaking out about the problems and the elephant in the room in the industry, and could be doing more to promote positive horse welfare, but instead are choosing to remain neutral and say nothing and just ignore the problems and pretend they're not there, or massively downplay them, or act like the discussion of these problems is just a hateful witch hunt rather than concern for horse welfare. And they just want to stay out of it. And I do think that that's something that people need to start looking at and pointing out, because they do have a duty to protect horse welfare. And these things are becoming so discussed at this point that they're aware of it. They're just choosing not to rock the boat or say anything because no one wants to be the first one to do it. And they're all more scared of how their peers are going to react to things than they are of horses continuing to be harmed. So I do think that that's something that needs to be looked at. I feel the same way about any celebrities who choose to continue just being neutral and saying nothing and not talk about issues that are impacting lots of people or animals. I think that we all have a duty to speak out about stuff and do what we can, rather than just being like, out of sight, out of mind, not my problem, not personally impacting me, I'm not the one suffering, who cares? And I think the choice to not do that is worth something, and it's something that we should look at, because it does display a lack of integrity. So anyways, thank you for listening to my little rant. I will update people on my move. I'm gonna do like a tour and stuff once I get settled in, but like this whole month is like insane for me. So things have been really hectic. If you're interested in ways of supporting my work and what I do, or want to see like behind the scenes stuff for the move as we get set up, I'm posting stuff to Patreon and Instagram subscriptions. If you want to subscribe there, that's one of the best ways you can support me. Or I'm having big sales in my store. If you want to shop equestrian apparel, horse bridles, bitless or bitted, check that out. I'm having 15% off until Sunday, and just trying to clear out as much stock as I can. So all of that helps, and it helps me continue doing what I'm doing. It also softens the blow of like the big expense that is a move. So anyways, thank you for watching, everyone. Have a great day, and I hope everyone is remaining somewhat sane in this crazy summer of horse stuff being exposed, because it is driving me a little bit crazy. And like the lengths people will go to defend anything that someone who competes at the Grand Prix level does is really starting to grind my gears, because frankly, I don't care what level someone competes at if their animals are suffering to do it. It shouldn't matter. We need to start caring more about the means used to achieve those ribbons and those wins and climbing up the levels, because how they got there matters more than the fact that they are there. Anyways, cheers. Have a good day.